Part two of today's show is going to look at who is Notre Dame right now. Not who Notre Dame was, not who we think Notre Dame will be, but who Notre Dame is right now. And part of that conversation right now, Shaun, is kind of what we just talked about is I think there's a lot of nervousness around the country about Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame. And because of the fact that he is who he is, he's being treated the way that he's being treated, perceived the way he's perceived, the success he's had on the recruiting trail, the fact that he's been able to go down south and get kids, he's been able to go down to Texas and get kids, he's able to go out west and get kids. He's beating Bama now for kids. He's beating Ohio State for kids. Not saying he's winning all the battles or most of the battles, but he's starting to win some, and where in the past they just never won those and often wouldn't fight those. And that's that him walking up to the big boy table that you were talking about earlier. He's willing to say, hey, look, I don't care that Nick Saban's on Benjamin Morrison now. In the past, they would have been like, well, we tried to sneak him under the radar, but now Nick Saban wants him, so we know we're not going to get him. Let's move on. He's like, so? I don't care. And Mike Mickens was that same way as well. And so where is Notre Dame now? Because the conversation came, Shaun, or this topic came from a conversation you and I had. And something I've talked a lot about on the show is I feel that one of the things going on right now is there's a lot of people in the media, amongst fan bases, including some in the Notre Dame fan base, that still view this team where it is today. I should say view this program, because we're not talking about the 24 team, view this program the same way they did past Notre Dame good teams, like 2012, like 2018, like 2020, like 05, like 06, where, they got a couple dudes here and there, but this is a team that just is a grinded out team, a try-hard team. They're really well coached. They're very experienced. And, they had a good run. We respect the job they're doing. And then after they have that great run, there's almost always a step back. I know that Notre Dame had a better record in 06 compared to 05, but we all watched those two teams play. And they only had a better record because they played one more game. They were not nearly as good of a team. In 2012, they go 12-1. The next year, they go 9-4. In 2015, they go 10-3. Great run. You lose to two. I think all three of your losses were to top 5 teams. That was when Brian Kelly gave us if we had done this and done that, we're a player or two away from blah, blah, blah. And then the next year they go 4-8 because he bought that and coached a little harder, coached a little better, and didn't actually make the changes that needed to be made for that program to thrive. And then, of course, we saw in 2018, the next year they went 11-2, but it was a very disappointing 11-2. They only really played 2 good teams all year. They got their butts kicked. They go to the playoff in 2020. And then the next year, I know that they were 11-2, but again, it was a similar situation where you played 2 good teams all year and they both beat you. And one of them, you got whooped pretty good at your own place. And if it's not for an Isaiah Foskey strip sack, you're about to go down 24-0 at your home field against Cincinnati. And then you, of course, blow a 28-7 lead against Oklahoma State. They were never as good that next year as they were in their 1 year. And a lot of times it's because that narrative was true. They were a very veteran team in those years. They did tend to lose a lot from those teams. They were they had their NFL talent, but they were, a lot of day 3 picks and a lot of guys that were try-hard guys. Where this team was very different, in our opinion, from a lot of those teams. And I think the narrative about Notre Dame is starting to change with some people. I saw that Andy Staples released his 2 early playoff predictions for next year, and he has Notre Dame back in the title game against Texas, losing again. But he has them back in the title against Texas. And you're starting to see that turn a little bit with some, Shaun. But I still think with too many people, there's a very fundamental misunderstanding of how good this team is because of the talent. And that's why we asked the question, is Notre Dame an elite program? And I think the answer is, based on this season of what we saw, plus where the program is trending, I think that answer is yes. And more people are going to start to understand that here moving forward, Shaun. And I think especially if you're able to make a hire like this James Blanchard hire, there's going to be a lot of people that really know the game and when I mean know the game, I'm not talking about like fans don't know. I mean people that are like in the game, they're in the business, whether they're covering the sport, whether they work as a coach, whether they work as an analyst, whether they work as a scout, whatever, they're going to be like, hold on a second. You're putting those two cats together? Uh-oh.
Yeah, and it just puts into perspective as we sit weeks out from what we watched in the national championship game and the disappointment, the pain the fan base had to deal with, but also the jubilation of what we were able to watch right before our very eyes. And to look at the nuances of it, look at the layers of it, to understand what they were able to accomplish. And it goes back to our previous conversation from a recruiting standpoint when I talked about Notre Dame being able to get the tier two, tier three recruits but not being able to get their tier one. Well, Chad Bowden might not have been able to do that during his time, but what Chad Bowden did was he raised the floor of the talent on the roster, in my opinion. To whereas if someone got hurt, if a starter got hurt, that was a guy to come in that could be productive and make sure that the offense, or we saw that in the offensive line, we saw that in the defensive line. We saw Benjamin Morrison go out. Now we see, and that to me is what Chad Bowden did. Like he followed what Marcus Freeman asked for. When Marcus Freeman said, I don't want ones and twos, I want 1As and 1Bs.
Yes.
And that is exactly what you saw play out this year. And the result of that was getting to the national championship in one of the most catastrophic injury-riddled seasons that I can remember.
Yeah.
Two important pieces and starters.
11 linemen on the two sides of the ball missed games. Guys that were either starters or key rotation guys. 11. You lost your All-American cornerback in game after game 6 of a 16-game season.
Yeah.
Your tight end room was banged up throughout the year. You never got a healthy version of Mitchell Evans.
No.
You know, Jeremiah Love is banged up last game of the regular season. Gets banged up, and he wasn't the same in the playoff.
Yeah.
And you saw it all year, Shaun, to not just like, oh, man, your number 4 D tackle in your rotation went down. No, they had 2 All-Americans that missed multiple games this postseason. You lost your stud All-American D tackle in the first round of the playoff and still played 3 more games. And Riley Mills was a dude the last 6, 7, 8, 9 games of the season. Shaun, let me add, so what I would say, Shaun, is I think that Chad Bowden and Marcus Freeman proved that they can get more of the elite players than they have in the past. They also proved that they can kind of get that maybe not elite, but that next group of really good, more of those.
Yeah.
The thing that I would say where there still needs to be proven is that you can get more of the elites, and not elites as in like 5-star kids, because to me,
talent.
Leonard Moore is an elite.
Yeah.
How he came from a ranking standpoint, can you get more of those game changers?
Yeah.
And to me, that's still the difference at important positions. Can you get more game changers on the D-line? Can you consistently still recruit the game changers in the secondary? Can you recruit some more game changers at wide receiver and maintaining other positions? I think those things are places where there's still a bar to be raised, where you have a Bryce Young, but you need 3 Bryce Youngs. That's the difference. And Lou Emoji said this about him in 2012. He said, look, he goes, Stephon Tuitt belonged on that field with Alabama. The difference is they had like 8 Stephon Tuitts.
Facts.
And Notre Dame had 1. You know, and that's the difference. Is you don't need 8, but you better have 4. You better have 3. And that's the thing that Notre Dame needs to do to close the gap. Because people saying like the gap's been erased. Not yet. It's been closed a lot, but it's not there yet until they win that title. Because there were times where if Notre Dame would have had I said this in past years, but if you just trade Jeremiah Smith and Bo Collins, and I mean no disrespect to Bo Collins, because Bo Collins is a good football player, Jeremiah Smith is a freak. You change those 2 players, you change the outcome of the game. There's no doubt in my mind, because if you give Notre Dame that type of weapon where you can just drop back and throw it up to them, you know what I mean? Like, they don't have that. Precision is still needed. Game planning is still needed. Play calling is still needed. Like I said in 2017, if you just trade Brandon Wimbush, who I love and adore as a young man, and he did a lot of great, but if you trade him and you just give them Lamar Jackson in 2017, like they've been close like that before.
Yeah.
And they still got to land that kind of guy. here's the difference between this team and past teams. We're not talking about needing to trade out the quarterback anymore. And I don't think we're going to be talking about that moving forward either. We're not talking about, boy, they lost that one corner and they weren't the same after that.
Yeah.
That's a big difference with those past teams is they're not quite – yes, I would love to have that Jeremiah Smith type of guy. Yes, I would have loved it if the Notre Dame defensive line would have had a JTT on it, on that defensive end. Well, you could argue that maybe they would have if Boubacar doesn't get hurt. But you get what I'm saying? Like, so, yeah, there's still some pieces missing, but they're way closer than they've been. And I think what this season showed is that Notre Dame is now an elite program. They're not a tier 1 team because that's a different conversation we'll talk about part 3.
Yeah.
But are they one of those teams that right now, if they continue doing what they're doing each year, you look at and say, that team has a shot to win a championship. That team has a shot to win a championship in 25 and 26 and 27. They won't win it every year, but they're going to be a team that people look at and say, this is a team that you got to be worried about.
And see, I want to talk about it in the present. I think we have seen that, right? Because we've been covering Notre Dame being on the road. The net that they've cast along the defensive line is totally different than the net they've cast the previous 2 cycles. Not to say that they haven't gotten good players on D-line, but now you're talking about getting a bunch together. Right. What you're just talking about, getting 3 or 4 of those guys.
They would
3 or 4 Bryce Youngs.
Bryce Young, and if they got him, great. If they didn't, there was a big drop-off.
Exactly.
They would target a Boubacar, and if you got him, great. But if you didn't, there's a drop-off.
It's a drop-off. Yeah.
And now it's like there's like 4 or 5 of those guys on the list at each position. And that's what we mean by cast a wider net. It's not that they weren't going after big-time guys before, but it'd be like a guy or 2, and if you missed on them, you were kind of screwed. Yeah. What they did now is like, look, we're going to go after 10 studs at D-tackle in hopes that we can get 2 of them. We're going to go after 10 studs at defensive end in hopes we can get 2 of them. And that's a different strategy than we've seen before.
Yeah.
And it's a bolder strategy. And it shows that this staff is saying, hey, guys, do you know the run we just went on? Let's capitalize on that. And that's something that they didn't do in the past.
Yeah.
They wouldn't capitalize on that because most times you had your head coach was going out and interviewing for NFL jobs and wasn't putting in the work to do that. But that's the thing that you notice, Shaun, is where'd they go first week, the 1 week on the road they had? Texas, Cali, Florida, Georgia, and then up to the Carolinas and up to Philly and Jersey.
Yeah.
Right? That's your base. That's what you need your base to be. And they didn't go out there and see some guys that they know they can close on easily. They went out and saw dudes. Dylan McCullough saw some dudes this week. Mike Mickens saw some dudes this week. Al Washington saw a lot of dudes this week. You know, Joe Rudolph went and saw, some dudes. And obviously a lot of them they've got committed. But he went out and saw some Kenny Ogboko and Felix Ojo and guys like that as well. So they're getting out there and putting in that work saying, look, because we're not satisfied with where it's been. We knew we did what we needed to do to get here, but we know that there's another level to get to, and that's that hunger to get you there. But even besides that, Shaun, just looking at the roster now, this is where I think a lot of people are missing the boat with this Notre Dame team is not, there's those stereotypical buzzwords that have been used about Notre Dame in the past that are still being used about Notre Dame now.
Yeah.
That I think shows that people still don't understand who this team was. Notre Dame went into the college football playoff this year with the best athlete of any team at quarterback, and it's not close. Notre Dame went into the college football playoff this year with a running back room that can compete with anybody. They went into the college football playoff this year with a secondary that, in my opinion, could compete with anybody. They didn't have that necessarily. They had a linebacker room that athletically could compete with anybody in the country, despite what some people have tried to tell us. They're not there yet. The biggest difference in that game against Ohio State, line play. D-line play especially. Ohio State could make some plays there. Notre Dame couldn't.
Yeah.
Notre Dame had trouble covering Ohio State's receivers. Ohio State had trouble covering Notre Dame's receivers. The leading receiver in that game was not Emeka Egbuka. It wasn't Jeremiah Smith. It was Jaden Greathouse. And so they're not there yet. But I think people are missing the boat because we heard all this stuff. Well, you didn't play anybody and you blew a bunch of teams out who sucked and blah, 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 blah. But here's the reality, Shaun. You silenced that noise when you got to the playoff. So, oh, yeah, you beat Georgia without their starting quarterback. All right, well, they beat Texas without their starting quarterback. And Notre Dame had plenty of, well, what if we had this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy? And you won by 13, and you didn't play that well.
No.
Like, that's the thing, is it used to be where Notre Dame could have beat Georgia in the past, but they needed everything to go right. This team was just like, no, we're just better than you. You know what I mean? That's just the fact. Yeah, you could talk all you want about your quarterback, but Notre Dame kicked their butt. Notre Dame's defensive line kicked Georgia's offensive line's butt. They shut down their running backs. In the second half of that game, when the game mattered most, they couldn't hang with the athletes that Notre Dame had in any phase of the game. That's the difference. When you play Penn State, they didn't play that well against Penn State. The first half they played terrible. But once Notre Dame started figuring out, Penn State had no answers for Notre Dame. That was a talent thing. It wasn't that Penn State's coaches got out coached and everybody's looking to, well, they shouldn't have called this and that and the other thing. No, the quarterback made a bad decision, but he made a bad decision because he was getting pressured and because Notre Dame's secondary is really good. And so the difference is, Ohio State's kicking Notre Dame's butt early on because Notre Dame's not playing well. And then Notre Dame figures it out, and then they start giving Ohio State some problems. Ohio State takes their foot off the gas, and Notre Dame makes them pay for it. That's the difference, is athletically, this team can compete with anybody now. Doesn't mean they're going to beat everybody because obviously they didn't beat Ohio State. But that's the difference, is that I think people are missing the boat. And yes, they lost some dudes. Riley's a big loss. We saw R.J. Oben at the Senior Bowl doing some things. We saw Jack Kaiser doing Jack Kaiser things at the Senior Bowl. They're going to lose Xavier Watts, one of the best to ever do it at Notre Dame. Riley Leonard, Riley Mills, Howard Cross. The difference between this team and past teams is Notre Dame has now entered into a mode where they are now a reload program, not a rebuild program. And that's the thing with Brian Kelly, is his teams are always like this. And not always record, because his last 5 teams had a similar record, but you and I could watch some of those teams and say that 21 team and that 2019 was not like the 2018 team. The 2020 team was a great run, but that team benefited from a schedule that was just, let's be honest, not at all challenging until the postseason. And you could look at those teams and say, like, yeah, that team would kick the mess. The team that we saw in 24 would kick the mess out of the 22 team, the 21 team, the 20 team, the 19 team.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to see this team go against the 18 team. But the 18 team, if you were to say, okay, well, we'll play that team, but you've got to take out your top 2 pass rushers. You got to take out your left tackle. You got to take out your center. You got to take out one of your – that team would have been screwed. You know what I mean? So, to me, that's where you talk about, is Notre Dame an elite program? They're an elite program now. They're recruiting like an elite program. They're beating teams you need to beat to be considered an elite program, and they're doing it because they have the talent of an elite program. And I think that's the difference between now and the past, where in the past, a couple spots would dominate the roster.
Yeah.
The 18 team was all about the lines. That was it. They were great on the lines. Outside of that, they were good in spots. They had good pass catchers. But then they play Clemson. And you realize your good pass catchers aren't like their good pass catchers. And your good corners aren't like their good corners. And then when they could kind of neutralize the 2 things you could do well, you had no chance. No chance. This team is different in that regard, Shaun. And that's why I say this Notre Dame team and program is not where past teams are at, because what people don't understand about this team is this was a very young Notre Dame team. They had 6 or 7 really old players. Leonard, Evans, Mills, Cross, Kaiser, Watts. 6 really veteran players that were key guys for you. The rest of your players were either veteran role players or young guys. And this is a very, very young team. And that's what I don't think people understand. A lot of your dynamic players are freshmen and sophomores. And that's evidence that Chad Bowden was doing a pretty good job, but also evidence that this is what is going to be true on the Marcus Freeman tenure, is you're going to see this from this program.
And not only that, what you have seen, especially for Al Washington, we could talk about, being ecstatic about the wide net he's cast in this recruiting class for 26, which in my opinion is going to be a byproduct of the success. which goes to what Notre Dame wasn't able to capitalize on to take it to the next level with elite talent, coming off of visits to the semifinals or visits to a 2012 national championship game, right? I think you're starting to see the response from the athletes and their interest, and then also Notre Dame being more aggressive. The previous regime just didn't have a belief that they could go aggressive. They would just stay with the same thing. That to me is going to make the difference, especially when it comes to the wide receiver group, the group of wide receivers they're going at. The top six are like, yo, if we can get two of these kids out of this top six, that's a great start by Mike Brown. Now he's starting to prove himself on the recruiting trail. And so the development, we talked about it. You watched the film. Mike Brown, in our opinion, did a really good job with the wide receivers, as opposed to
Eventually, you saw it
eventually,
start
as
to
you saw
right.
progress.
It
Yes,
took a little
but
longer maybe than we thought it would,
right,
but it started to click when you
it
got into
started to
late
click,
November and in the postseason.
right?
Yeah.
And so, with that being said, now the development side, you feel comfortable with that at the wide receiver position moving forward. Defensive line, I think we'll get a better picture, but you have to feel pretty good. Like, yo, the depth they had ready to come in and play shows that these guys were ready to play. Like, were they as dominant as a Riley Mills rushing the passer? Probably not. But just making sure that that defense was able to go out and execute what Al Golden was asking it to execute. You feel good about that until, of course, you get to the national championship game, and that's when you need the difference makers against a team like Ohio State with the talent that they have. You need Riley Mills putting pressure on the quarterback at a key third down or a key fourth down in certain situations to get off the field and change the tide of that game. And so those are the type of guys that you were talking about that we need to make sure, whether it's through the portal or retention or development or recruiting, those are the guys that we have to make sure show up because they're going to be the difference makers that close the gaps. But this whole theory about Notre Dame being a Cinderella story just boggles my mind. And Notre Dame is not a Cinderella story under Marcus Freeman. This wasn't a group of misfits. This wasn't 16 Princeton taking down number one Georgetown with Alonzo Mourning. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not Notre Dame. And it's not Notre Dame moving forward under Marcus Freeman.
Mm-hmm.
No glass slipper here.
No.
None. These are red bottoms. Nice loafer red bottoms that Marcus Freeman is bringing to the table. This program is swaggy now. It's the hottest, if not the hottest, one of the hottest programs in all of college football. And it's a new day. And I understand the PTSD. I understand fans feeling like, well, I have to see it to believe it. I have to see it in consecutive years. Okay, sit back, get your popcorn, and watch.
Right.
And watch. Because the way things are floating and the way things are going, especially if they're able, in my opinion, to add James Blanchard to the mix, man, the sky's going to be the limit. And I think smart people can recognize that. Andy Staples pointing that out. I saw a couple of other way too early top 25s. Notre Dame is being recognized, in my opinion, by a lot of people as answering questions that people needed to see.
Right.
And people understanding, look, ladies and gents, that's a $20 million college football team that won a national championship. Let's not play.
Yeah.
Let's not play. That's a darn good football team that was bought and paid for. And obviously, the way things have gone in the aftermath, it was definitely like a one time. We getting the band together to go win this thing.
Right.
If we win that, we can disband this. And now they've taken a step back from a coaching standpoint.
Yeah.
From a roster's talent standpoint, Ohio State is always going to have a roster full of talent. But definitely from a coaching
they're
standpoint,
an asterisk because we don't know who the replacements are going to be.
We don't know.
Right.
We don't know. So that bears watching, right? So I just think within the fan base, because I could care less outside of the fan base. Within the fan base, let's not move forward in fear.
Right.
If you want to see more, that's totally understandable. But let us tell you from the operational side and from the way things were done, specifically recruiting wise, and what we see from the coaching staff. And I know the coaching staff has lost certain things, and maybe you don't think the new DC is equivalent to what we had in Al Golden, that's fine. But once again, whose defense is this? Is it really Marcus Freeman's thing?
Mm-hmm.
We'll find out. These are
We'll
things
find
that we
out.
sit back and we wait to see how they play out. But this is not your former regime, Notre Dame,
Right.
under Marcus Freeman. It's not. It's not. And things are trending up.
The 25 season is going to be interesting because you do have to, in my opinion, achieve a certain level of success in order to cement yourself there from a perception standpoint. I think that's important because if you take a big step back next season, and I mean worse than 10-2, then what you've done is you've said, okay, well, we're not a lot different than past Notre Dame teams. Maybe we were slightly better than some of those teams, but the next year proved that you're not a reload program. You're a mini. Now, the rebuild is a lot smaller than it used to be, but you're still a rebuild team. And that's what kind of gets me excited about what this team is going to be next year, Shaun, because I don't view them to be this way. They now have to go out and prove it. But I don't view them to be a team that is a rebuild thing. And I think the thing that I'm seeing this offseason, at least from a recruiting standpoint, and we'll find out if the coaching hire was made. Look, we set our piece on Chris Ash. Now we just all sit back and hope the Coach Freeman's right, and we'll just evaluate it in that regard. But if he's right on that hire, and that's probably my biggest offseason question mark right now is the Chris Ash hire. I feel the way that I feel about it. But like when I look at this team outside of that, Shaun, I don't look at a team like I look at a team that is going to have more question marks going into next season than maybe it did this season into fall camp. And when I mean question marks, I mean we don't know who the starter is going to be at quarterback. Not a question mark like, gee, I don't know if quarterback's going to be good, but more of I don't know who it's going to be. I don't know what the offensive line is necessarily going to look at like right now. I don't know what the defensive line may look like right. I mean, do they move Burnham here? Do they move Bryce Young there? Does Botelho come back? Does Boubacar come back? Who's that safety opposite of Don Schuler now? Who steps into Jack Kaiser's? Those are all question marks that we are going to have to find answers to. But when you look at it and you say, okay, it's not, do they have any good receivers? It's which receiver steps up and becomes the dude. Is it Malachi Fields, the newcomer? Is it Jaden Greathouse, who showed what he could do in the semifinals in the national title game? Is it Jordan Faison, who's been really good when healthy? Is it okay? I don't know who's going to start opposite Drake Bone, but I really don't care because we know that Kingston and Jalen Sneed and Jaden Alsbury are all going to play. And then you've got Madden Faramo and Preston Zenner and Bodie Cahoon kind of waiting in the wings to be in that conversation as well. You just get less concerned about it. And you're like, I mean, yeah, they got a new nickel, but I think Mike Mickens has kind of proven that, like, I just don't worry about that position anymore. I don't know who it's going to be, but I figure it's going to be pretty good because that's what Mike Mickens has done his entire time at Notre Dame is find good nickels, whether it was moving Tariq Bracy into that position in 2022 and then going out and getting Thomas Harper in 2023, a guy that most people never heard of, going out and getting Jordan Clark in 2024, now Devontae Smith. But the difference is, like, you kind of feel like, so this is what it's like being a Georgia fan. This is what it's being a Bama fan, where you're just like, okay, well, yeah, that guy's gone, but now it's time to go to the younger stud. Man, it sucks that Riley Leonard's gone. In the past, I'd probably be a lot more devastated that a guy like Riley Leonard's leaving. Because it's like, well, I don't know. Now it's just like, Riley did a phenomenal job. This 2014 would not be where they were without Riley Leonard. He's gone now. All right, let's roll. Because they have CJ Carr. They have Kenny Minchie. And if Steve Angeli beats them all out in a fair fight, that means Steve Angeli's ready to be a dude. I mean, I just don't worry about it anymore. I don't know who the dudes at receiver are going to be, but I'm not worried about receiver as much anymore. I'm not worried about linebacker. I'm not worried about corner. I'm not even really that worried about safety because of the portal edition they went out and got. And you start getting excited about, yeah, well, that guy's gone, but that just means we get more of so-and-so. You know what I mean? That's all that means. And that's the difference between where it was in the past, where it's like in 2015, you're going from Max Redfield and Elijah Shoemate at safety
Yeah.
to Avery Sebastian and Drew Tranquil the next year. Drew Tranquil, who finished his career as a dude at linebacker. You know what I mean? Like, that's the difference between those teams and these teams is you went from, some dudes in the past to guys that are good players, but not dudes. Whereas this team, it's like you're losing experience here, but you're actually going to have more talent.
Yeah.
We just saw that happen this year. Yes, you're losing a ton of experience with J.D. Bertrand going to the NFL, who was a heck of a player at Notre Dame. But they ended up being just fine at middle linebacker because they had guys like Drake Bowen and Kingston that were dudes. You know what I mean? It's like
And a guy that's kind of like stealing the show at the Senior Bowl as
right,
well as
right.
their lead.
Who moved in, had been a Rover for 3 years, and he just
Right.
moves into Will, and you got more athletic at that position. You look at like the safety position and what they lost there. You lose a 6-year senior in DJ Brown, you lose Ramon Henderson, who played a lot of plays, and they end up being better. Why? Because a more talented football player who lacked their experience steps into that role, and you're more talented. You lose Benjamin Morrison, major blow. He was a dude. What happens? True freshman Leonard Moore steps in. Like, that's where this program is now.
Yeah.
Where it's like, if they're healthy, meaning guys that got hurt this year come back, okay, maybe you're not as good as D tackle next year, but you're still talking about you've got Gabriel Rubio and Donovan Heinisch and Jared Dawson and Elijah Hughes and Armel Mukam and Sean Sevillano and Brendan Vernon and Devin Houston. And I mean, I don't want to leave anybody out because every time you list a bunch of guys, people are like, well, what about this guy? Like, it's not meant to be an exhaustive list. You got some guys coming in, obviously from the portal. You should be solid there, but now the expectation is, but you're going to be a lot better on the edge this year. That's the thing that you look at where Notre Dame is different now, Shaun, is because they're able to go from a veteran talented guy to a younger talented guy, and all that you're lacking is experience. And in this day and age, you can get that pretty quickly. And that's the difference between this Notre Dame team and past Notre Dame teams, is because you're now a different type of athlete. Where in the past you're trying to win with a Tavon Coney, who's a great instinctive football player, but a limited athlete, which is a big reason he went undrafted. You're trying to win with Joe Schmitz and Drew White's great kids, good athletes, especially Drew White was a very good athlete. But he was Drake Bowen's a similar athlete to Drew White, but he's 3 inches taller and 20 pounds heavier and stronger.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. And that's where I think people are missing the boat with this football team is they're just reloading with more talented players that just lack the experience of those guys. So, you're going to lose Rocco Smiller, Pat Coogan. That should not be dismissed as no big deal.
Right.
When you lose guys that had 20-plus starts that stabilize, like it's funny that all these people are like, Joe Rudolph did a great job doing this, this, and this. Yeah, and the guys that were the ones that stepped up to do that are gone now, and you're acting like it's no big deal. But why are people acting like that? It's some of it's because that's what fans we always do. It's you convince yourself that losses are no big deal. The other part of it is because you're like, well, who's going to step into the lineup? It's Charles Jagasaw, it's Ashton Craig, it's a Sullivan Absher, it's an Anthony Knapp, it's a Gerby Lambert, and you're just like, okay, they're going to be fine. We don't know that they will, but because they're replacing good football players with more talented football players, you understand why there's a level of excitement. And I don't know if enough people nationally really appreciate that. Even some of the teams that Notre Dame vanquished, because they spend so much time like crying about what happened to this and then this guy slipped and that I think they missed the boat. Like, no, guys, you just got beat by a better team. Yeah. You just got beat by a more talented team. And that's what happened to you. And that's where we say we believe Notre Dame is an elite program because of that.
And I think Notre Dame is coming to understand at their own pace. And I think that's the issue amongst the Notre Dame fan base, because they want the program to invest. Let me not use the word because maybe, it upsets people when I say the phrase bought and paid for. Let me just switch that to made a significant investment, right? And I use the example of Ohio State. Ohio State does not win this championship unless they make a significant investment, because the roster building.
What is wrong with that phrase?
The people
it's
get offended.
Legal. It's legal.
Thank you.
You're allowed to go out and buy your team.
They made a significant investment, and here's the kicker. It's very rare. It's a perfect storm. Salute, tip of the cap. You get Caleb Downs because Nick Saban retired. That's the only reason he's on the market. The only reason. But you had to make a significant investment in him. And he changed the entire backside of your defense. Your safeties got better by the numbers playing next to him.
Right.
Another great player. He made that much of a difference. You already talked about having a kid, Jeremiah Smith. You said, yo, you flip him, you put him, and give them Bo Collins, it might impact the game. Who has that? No one else in the country had that dude.
Right.
You
They
had
went
to
out
make
and bought Quinshon
You had
Judkins.
to make a significant investment to beat out Oregon. You had to make a significant investment in Jeremiah Smith to beat out Oregon for his services. You had to make a significant investment to retain all of your players that were slotted to go day 1, day 2.
There's nothing
in the
wrong with that, Shaun.
2024 NFL
There's
draft.
nothing wrong with
Thank you.
You're
and
not
it's
saying
documented.
that, right?
It's documented that you
The
made
head coach has admitted it.
Thank you.
That's not an insult. I think people still are in this world of like cheating. It's not cheating. It's the rules. You did a great job of it, and you added those guys to a very veteran team, and it worked for you. You went out and paid a lot of money to get one of the best offensive minds in the business to turn down being a head coach to come pay for you.
Absolutely.
You bought him. That's not a bad thing. That's part of the business. You went out and got Oklahoma State's defensive coordinator. That's not a bad thing. That's what just like Notre Dame did that with Riley Leonard.
Thank you. If Notre Dame won
for free,
that would have been an investment.
That's what ESPN said about Notre Dame to beat Georgia. Transfers do this again. And it's like,
absolutely.
What I said to Notre Dame fans, like, why are you offended by this? Like, this isn't a shot at you. This is the way the game played out. But this is the way the game played out. What happened? Your field goal kicker, who's a transfer, kicks you a field goal to go up 6-3.
Mm-hmm.
Your transfer from Duke has a strip sack, and then your other transfer from Duke then throws a pass to your transfer from Clemson to go up 13-3. And then your transfer from Marshall returns the opening kickoff of the second half back for a touchdown to go up 20.
Significant investment.
Yes.
That you benefited from.
It wasn't like Ohio State's.
No.
But that's okay. It's not people. I don't know why people take that as an insult. And you did buy your roster. Your head coach admitted it. You have to in today's era. If you don't, you're going to lose your team. If you don't, you're going to have a bunch of guys leave. There's nothing wrong with saying it that way, Shaun. And Notre Dame had to give some of their current players pay raises this offseason to keep them from jumping in the portal. That's life.
Yeah.
And that's what you need to do. And Ohio State did that. And they did that to a way that led them to a championship.
And that's what possibly frustrates Notre Dame fans. Like, yo, we should be investing more. And I think in their own way, Notre Dame has invested more and will continue to invest more. I think the facilities that are going up should be considered as a significant investment to improve, not only allowing the players to be at their very best on and off the field, from a nutrition standpoint, getting back to health, helping Orlando and his plans, and then also attracting the best of the best in recruiting and helping the coaches to be able to do everything they need to do. So that's a significant investment. You just can't look at NIL. There are a lot of things that go towards Notre Dame being able to be the best they can be as a football program. I think Malachi Fields is a significant investment at the wide receiver position and an upgrade.
Well, you don't think Malachi Fields is coming to Notre Dame for free just because he wants to get that master's degree from Notre Dame?
I highly doubt it. And
guess what, Shaun? There's nothing wrong with that. That's within the rules.
None. It's okay. It's the way football is. And to be honest, a perfect storm. It doesn't happen like that. You don't have better yet, kudos to Ohio State, the administration and the collective stepping up when their staff came to them and said, yo, this is what we need to keep our guys on the defensive line. This is what we need to keep Donovan Jackson.
Because they weren't going to lose, they weren't going to lose JT or Jack Sawyer or Donovan Jackson to another college.
No.
They were going to lose those guys to the NFL.
To the NFL.
And they were able to convince them to stay. That's smart.
That's very smart.
It's okay to admit that. Yeah. And that's what you need to do to consistently be an elite team, because in today's football, to be an elite team, you have to be able to retain and acquire.
Yes.
Because if every year you have to acquire more talent than normal because you lost a bunch of your talent,
Yeah,
you're going
it's
to
not gonna
struggle to
be.
be consistent.
Yeah.
And that's where Notre Dame, that's the challenge Notre Dame has in front of them. It's the challenge that Ohio State has in front of them, and Georgia and Alabama. And people say, what happened to Georgia? They went down as quickly as they did. I'm like, went down. They went 11-2 against a really tough schedule and won the national and won the SEC. Like, they didn't suck this year as much as Georgia fans. What's funny is those fans thought Notre Dame sucks and you got no shot against us and blah, 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 blah. And our backup quarterback's better than your starter. I literally heard people say that. And one guy who does this for a living talked about how a 10-point game was now a 7-point game because of the backup quarterback. But then when Notre Dame beats them by 13, it's like, well, it's because we had a backup quarterback. Well, you knew that going in, and you still thought they were going to win by touchdown. But
Exactly.
the point is Georgia lost a lot of young players that would have otherwise been stepping into roles this year, next year, because they didn't want to sit, because they didn't properly build the culture of that team in a way that allowed those guys to stay the way that Ohio State was able to keep some younger players on the roster. Brandon Ennis hasn't transferred yet. Why? Because Brian Hartline has built a culture in that room of, hey, no, you could go somewhere else to get more money, go somewhere else to get more catches. But your time will come, number one. And number two, you stay here and stick it out. You're going to make even way more money down the road because I'm going to turn you into a first-round NFL draft pick.
Yeah.
And you sold the culture. Notre Dame's doing that. You and I know for a fact that last offseason, Benjamin Morrison had some big-time schools offering him 7-figure deals.
Yeah.
I've talked to multiple sources, including some inside the program, that talked about how Jaden Greathouse got big offers. This is before the semifinals. Leonard Moore had people coming after him. Jeremiah Loves had people throwing big dollar deals at him. They're staying. Why? Because you have established a culture, but also because you're willing to say, hey, the culture means that you don't have to necessarily match offers. But if you're paying a kid $100K, another school offers $1 million, he's not like, yeah, but I love the culture here. Like, no, I love the culture here, but I love the culture for a cool $500,000. You know what I mean? Or 700,000. But like, coach, that's a 10-fold increase.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, they still got to make, that doesn't mean that kid's not bought in. That's how the business is now. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. That's what all teams have to do if they want to be successful. So anyway, that's where Notre Dame is, right? Is these kids want to stay, but you got to make sure you're doing right by them also, because you can't take advantage of them. Because then it's like, well, you don't even really value me that much, you know what I mean? And so that makes it a bit interesting. But Shaun, I think when you look at this team, though, as we wrap this up, the thing that's going to determine if Notre Dame can maintain this elite status that we believe they're in for this year and the next 2 years is obviously the D coordinator hire. He needs to be right. And you need this recruiting coordinator hire to be right. Because I do think the offense is in a good place and is going to stay in a good place, because I don't see Mike Denbrock going anywhere. As long as you do right by him, as far as like, you're not have to throw him under the bus if they have a bad game or treating him poorly or whatever. And I have no intent. I don't have no expectation of Mike Marks to do any of that. But I see him staying and building an elite offense at Notre Dame. You're going to lose some coaches these next 3-4 years. Mm-hmm. That's part of the football. I mean, no one's feeling sorry for Ohio State that they lost their O-line coach and both coordinators. And the expectation of Ohio State fans is we'll find somebody and be just fine. And, we'll see what they do. But the point is, that's what great teams do. When you win, people are going to take your coaches. The great coaches make good hires, replace them, and they keep winning. That's what the good teams do. But you've got to make those good hires.
Yeah.
And so we're going to find out if those things keep it rolling. That's the only thing that could really slow this program down under Marcus Freeman, is that right there. Is either A, the school stops investing in the program, which under the current leadership, that's not something I'm concerned about. Or B, Marcus Freeman starts making some BK-type hires and he's unwilling to admit that he made mistakes and just keeps trotting those guys out there.
Yeah.
The mistake was not hiring Brian Van Gorder. I didn't like the hire, but every coach makes those kind of hires. The mistake was keeping him past 2014, when it was obvious to anyone with a pulse that was just no. Urban Meyer made a terrible decision promoting Ed Warner and Tim Beck to offensive coordinator. got beat in the playoff 31-0. But he didn't just say, well, let's give it another couple years. 1 year of that, and he realized that ain't it. Let's go make a change. And he went out and got Kevin Wilson and Ryan Day. Very next offseason.
Mm-hmm.
Nick Saban's made mistakes with hires, and he fixes it quickly. That's what good coaches do. And that's, Marcus Freeman will make some bad hires. He made one at wide receiver when he took over, and he fixed it. Took him 2 years. But I think there was no need to make the move after 1 year one. There was enough positive going on that you felt like, okay, there's some things got to get figured out, but it wasn't something where a move needed to be made. The recruiting success was going there. And then when it became apparent that a move needed to be made, he made it right after the season and went out and made a good hire to replace him, I think. So don't think he made a great hire with his second OC hire. It's not bad. Like some guy there, he's a bum. Jared Parker's a bum. A bum doesn't set a school record in points per game. Like he may not have been elite, and he definitely wasn't, but he wasn't a bum. But obviously, Marcus Freeman knew there was a need for an upgrade there, and they upgraded. And so that's the only thing to me that could hold this program back is those hires get made poorly, and then he doesn't correct them. And but that's the same fear for every program. Mm-hmm. Shaun, that's not unique to Notre Dame or Marcus Freeman. That's always true. If Ryan Day goes out there and makes good hires to replace Chip Kelly and Jim Leonard or Jim Knowles, how's that be fine? Because they're in reload mode. If he doesn't, then they'll struggle to win at the same level they have. That's true for everybody, and that's where Notre Dame is at. So we're going to move on to part 3 of our show. That kind of dives into sort of a look at Notre Dame and kind of where they are and our argument that this is an elite team. And I do think they're on that cusp of now Notre Dame can truly go toe-to-toe with anybody, win some, lose some, but there's nobody you're like, God, no shot against that team. I don't think there's that team anymore. There's teams that can beat them, but they can beat anybody on any given Saturday or in the playoff a Wednesday, a Thursday, a Friday, or a Monday. Now, so it's any given day now. It's not even a Saturday anymore, Shaun, but any given day, they can beat anybody. So we're going to move on to our final topic next, folks. But before we do, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. And of course, as always, make sure that you are supporting our channel, but also supporting our brand over at boards.ourshbreakdown.com. That's where we have all of our great conversation after the show. It's where we put all of our intel. We're going to have some new things coming out here over the next year that I think people are going to be really excited about. And you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com.